Part 31. At the beginning, I gave the future empress her death. I became stronger because I was stupid. Author, Leng Mian Buletin Leng. Chapter 301. Du Yulin sighed softly and said, "Not yet. According to His Majesty's previous instructions, all the people in Chang'an City are not allowed to go out, are not allowed to make noise, and are not allowed to move around. Everyone is to stay at home and cannot step out of their rooms. Anyone who disobeys the order will be executed." When he said this, Du Yulin's tone was calm, but his eyes became darker. Of course, this order was not issued by His Majesty, and His Majesty would never issue such an order. It was an order he had to give as a last resort in order to stabilize the people's hearts in Chang'an City. Otherwise, when those monks gather together, they will only accuse and discuss His Majesty, and spread panic everywhere. "Oh, Your Majesty, did you really abandon us and run away?" Another civil servant lowered his head, with a frustrated and desperate expression on his face. Hearing this, Du Yulin's eyes turned red. "Impossible." Du Yulin raised his eyes and stared ahead, his voice resolute. "Your Majesty is the son of destiny, and he has the fate of immortality. How could he abandon De Qin and leave alone? There must be something that has hindered Your Majesty, otherwise with His Majesty's character, it is impossible that he has not been heard from until now." Wang Xing, the Minister of Revenue, also nodded. "Your Majesty may just be in trouble temporarily. But if he was only in temporary trouble, why didn't he notify us in time?" a general roared. "Nowadays, the situation in Great Qin is so difficult. Hundreds of millions of troops have gathered in the Apocalypse territory. He claims to be the leader of the army, but there is no news yet. What does this mean? Doesn't this mean that our country, Great Qin, will be destroyed?" Wang Xing opened his mouth, but could not say a word. Everyone was silent, and no one could defend His Majesty. Alas! Those civil servants lowered their heads, their hearts filled with bitterness. Your Majesty, where are you?" After a long time, Du Yulin withdrew his gaze from the distance and said in a deep voice, "Okay, everyone should perform their duties. Remember, we are the guardians of Chang'an City. Chang'an City will always be the last line of defense at any time. Even if His Majesty fails to come back, Chang'an cannot be lost, and we cannot retreat." "Yes." All civil servants responded in unison. "In addition, we need to be more vigilant to prevent monsters and ghosts from taking the opportunity to sneak into our Chang'an City," Du Yulin said coldly. "Yes, Imperial Master." All the civil servants bowed together again and responded respectfully. Du Yulin nodded and walked slowly outside the hall. There was just a hint of confusion in those eyes. "Your Majesty, where are you?" "Report." Suddenly, a rapid sound echoed through the sky. While Du Yulin was thinking, a soldier hurriedly rushed into the hall. The ministers suddenly raised their heads and followed the sound, and suddenly saw a guard running over quickly, with anxious expressions on his face. Hearing this, everyone's heart skipped a beat. Du Yulin frowned and asked indifferently, "What happened?" The soldier swallowed his saliva and said tremblingly, "National Preceptor, it's not good." An extremely ominous premonition emerged in the hearts of all the ministers, especially the generals and generals, who could not help but erupt in a terrifying aura. Seeing this scene, the soldier turned pale with fright, his legs and feet trembled, and he almost fell to the ground. Du Yulin's eyes flashed, he stretched out his hand to stop everyone, and a cold voice sounded, "Tell me what's going on." The soldier's body trembled for a moment, then he said bravely, "Rebellion teams have appeared in Jiangnan County, Liang County, Luotian County, and other 5 counties. The slogan declared to the outside world is, 'Overthrow the tyranny of the Qin dynasty.'" Boom! It was like a thunderbolt blasting in my ears. In an instant, the faces of all the generals and generals suddenly turned pale, their hearts were beating wildly, and their pupils shrank violently, as if they had suffered a huge fright. Rebellion. Du Yulin's pupils shrank suddenly, his face was extremely cold, and his murderous intent was overwhelming. Whoever gave them the courage to rebel will really deserve death. The other generals were even more angry and smashed the table with one punch. National Master, a general stood up and asked with clasped fists, I am willing to lead the elite cavalry to suppress the rebellion. The general and others are also willing to go and destroy the rebels. The generals are willing to go out and clear all obstacles for His Majesty. In an instant, the heroes were furious and their morale was high. They wanted to set off immediately to kill the rebel team. But after Du Yulin pondered for a moment, he shook his head and said calmly, since the rebels dare to rebel, they must have been well prepared. If you attack rashly, you will easily suffer heavy losses. He looked around at the generals present and said, this matter is not a trivial matter. If you leave without permission and cause the city of Chang'an to be lost, you will be unworthy of your Majesty's great trust, and we will all become sinners throughout the ages. The generals paused for a moment, looked embarrassed, and fell silent. Although they were enthusiastic and wanted to go to war, there was nothing wrong with what Du Yulin said. Then what should we do? Should we just let them continue to do evil? A general said with anger and gritted teeth. P.S. Today's engagement can be considered a success. Although there were some minor twists and turns, overall it was nothing and it went on smoothly. Of course, because everything had been discussed before, there were not many changes during the engagement. There are still some people who lament that from today on, the relationship between boyfriend and girlfriend is no longer friends, but fiancé. It's still amazing to think about it. 10 years ago, I could never have imagined that I would experience everything today. Life is like a play, with the stage being on stage, the curtain rising and falling, and it is wonderful. Today's play should be one of the few highlights in my life. It ended successfully. I will work harder in the future. After all, I will slap her father in the face in 3 years. After 3 years, the Dragon King returns. At the beginning, I gave the future empress her death. I became stronger because I was stupid. Author, Len Mian Buletin Leng. Chapter 302. No, another general slammed the table and shouted angrily, we must not sit back and watch the rebels get away with it. That's right, we would rather die than let the rebels do whatever they want, another general shouted. Other generals and commanders echoed, filled with righteous indignation and murderous intent, as if they were going to overturn the entire palace. National Master, I am willing to lead the elite to suppress the rebels. I am also willing to go to the battle. I think we need to send people to contact many generals in other states and counties to jointly resist the rebels. Well, it should be so. We must pass on this bad news. In the court where there was a lot of discussion, all the generals were filled with righteous indignation, rubbing their hands, and wishing to lead the troops to the battle immediately. As soldiers of the Qin dynasty, they naturally couldn't stand the existence of these rebels. No matter when, traitors are always the most hated existence. More hateful and abominable than those invaders. Seeing the turbulent crowd, Du Yulin felt a sense of relief. After several rounds of baptism by His Majesty, the court has lost many capable ministers, but has gained many loyal generals. Especially after the reshuffle of the ministers who represent the power of the aristocratic families, the atmosphere in the court is much more harmonious than before. If the distribution of ministers in the past is followed, the court will definitely be in chaos, and even each of them will have their own ulterior motives, only thinking about how to preserve the interests of their own aristocratic families, and thus ignoring the safety of Dakin. From this point of view alone, His Majesty's previous practice of wantonly slaughtering ministers of aristocratic families does not seem to be wrong. At least the atmosphere in the court is indeed much better than before. However, there are still disadvantages. Because these generals and ministers have just taken office, or have been in office for a short time, they are not familiar with the overall situation and their own business, and they are more impulsive in doing things and cannot take the overall situation into consideration. Du Yulin looked solemn, his face was cold, his eyes flickered constantly, and he fell into deep thought. This is a thorny problem. The Qin dynasty is now facing the attack of the entire Tiankai realm and is completely unable to suppress the rebellion. If the army is forcibly sent to suppress it, it is afraid that the enemies of the Tiankai realm will seize the opportunity, which will be troublesome. Especially since His Majesty is not in Chang'an City at this time, it is another matter whether they can defend it alone. Du Yulin remained silent, with a look of worry between his brows. After a moment, he slowly raised his head, looked at the soldiers who were eager to try, sighed, and said, "Everyone, this matter is not a child's play, this matter is serious, listen to me first." Hearing this, the originally noisy court suddenly became silent. All the generals and soldiers stared at Du Yulin with burning eyes, waiting for his decision. Du Yulin took a deep breath, calmed down, and said, "The reason why the rebels chose this time to rebel must be that they are aware of the situation that Dakan is facing now, so they must have planned it in advance. We may not succeed in suppressing the rebels rashly. Besides, there is no news from His Majesty yet. If we attack at this time, it will only disperse our forces. When the enemy army in Tiankai domain raids Chang'an, it may be difficult to even return for support. Therefore, I suggest waiting and watching for the time being. After all, Chang'an City is the top priority." The generals frowned even more tightly. They knew that what Du Yulin said was right, but even if they understood this truth, they still felt aggrieved, resentful, and uncomfortable. At this time, everyone had an idea in their hearts again: if His Majesty was here. But His Majesty left Chang'an City with a group of delicate women and disappeared. No one knew where he went. Although they all recognized the importance of His Majesty, they had to admit that His Majesty was really a complete tyrant. It was agreed that the Emperor would lead the army in person, but what was the result? Not only did they not receive any encouraging good news, but they were left leaderless and frightened. Is this really something a ruler can do? Even a tyrant couldn't do such a thing, right? Du Yulin also sighed and fell silent. In fact, he was also somewhat puzzled and confused. Logically, His Majesty should not give up Chang'an City. After all, there is a fairy palace built by His Majesty in Chang'an City, but why has His Majesty not given any news? Did he encounter a strong enemy? Or did he encounter an accident? Du Yulin shook his head. He felt that these two possibilities were very small. His Majesty's strength has always been unfathomable, and he has mastered means that he could not imagine. He did not believe that there would be anything that could stop His Majesty or even threaten His Majesty. Unless it was. Thinking of a certain possibility, Du Yulin's heart suddenly jumped, his face turned pale in an instant, his forehead was sweating, and his hands and feet were cold. "National Master, what's wrong with you?" Seeing this, several generals immediately noticed Du Yulin's abnormality. Others also showed surprise in their eyes and looked at Du Yulin. "National Master, are you okay?" A younger general asked with concern, his tone full of care. "I'm fine," Du Yulin forced a smile and waved his hand, "I just suddenly thought of some small things." At this time, Wang Xing, the Minister of Revenue, suddenly stood up, shook off his fat gourd, and his pair of mung bean-like eyes narrowed into a slit, and said solemnly, "National Master, I think your idea is safe, but it is not applicable to the current situation." After a pause, he did not wait for Du Yulin to say anything, and continued, "Now is the time when the Qin dynasty is facing danger. If we show weakness again and again, it will only boost the arrogance of the rebels." Du Yulin frowned when he heard this, looked at Wang Xing, and said, "Minister Wang, just say whatever you want." Wang Xing smiled faintly and said in a loud voice, "National Master, those rebels will think that our Qin dynasty is afraid of them, and thus become more crazy, and then it will be troublesome. So what we have to do now is not to defend Chang'an, but to gather all the troops of our Qin dynasty, take the initiative to attack the rebels, win the victory as soon as possible, and take advantage of the victory to seize the lost land, and turn this war into a victory for our Qin dynasty. Only in this way can we improve the morale of the army and lay a good foundation for the next battle. Otherwise, when the army of the apocalypse domain arrives, we will have no chance. Wang Xing spoke eloquently, with a loud voice, and obviously had a plan in mind. After he finished speaking, the soldiers and generals in the hall nodded in agreement, thinking that what Wang Xing said made sense. Du Yulin's face changed and he was hesitant. He also knew that what Wang Xing said made sense, but he was worried that doing so would lead to the fall of Chang'an City. After all, according to intelligence, the strength of the Tiankai domain is extremely strong, far exceeding the army that Chang'an City currently has. If they come in full force, Chang'an City will definitely not be able to hold out for too long. Since your Majesty has left us to sit in Chang'an, then we cannot disappoint your Majesty's expectations. Seeing Du Yulin's hesitation, Wang Xing said in a deep voice, if we don't go to fight, how can we prove our value, and how can we meet your Majesty in the future? National Master, don't hesitate. If we wait for the Tiankai domain's army to arrive in Chang'an, it will be too late for us to leave the city. National Master, what Shang Xuanhuan said makes sense. The Qin dynasty must not allow those traitors to make trouble at will, otherwise it will surely perish. National Master, please make a quick decision. The generals in the hall echoed one after another. Du Yulin sighed when he saw this scene, and finally said in a deep voice, okay, in this case, let's do as Minister Wang said. The Imperial Master is wise. The generals clasped their fists and bowed. Wang Xing showed joy on his face when he saw this. But who is suitable to suppress the rebels? Du Yulin muttered to himself with a flash of thought in his eyes. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. At the beginning, I gave the future empress her death. I became stronger because I was stupid. Author, Len Mian Buletin Leng. Chapter 303. As a national advisor, he has to sit in Chang'an City and must not leave here. The suppression of the rebels is an extremely important matter and it is difficult for ordinary generals to do it. There was an inexplicable meaning on the corner of Wang Xing's mouth beside him. He stood up again and said loudly. There is no need to worry about it, Imperial Advisor. Since I raised this matter, then naturally I will personally lead the troops to suppress the rebels. Oh, Du Yulin was stunned for a moment, then looked surprised and asked, are you sure you can do it? Others also looked at Wang Xing with surprise in their eyes. Everyone here doesn't know that Wang Xing, the Secretary of the Ministry of Revenue, is a flatterer. He is greedy for life and afraid of death. He only pretends to be His Majesty's authority and never does serious business. They were already surprised by the point of view they just made. Unexpectedly, they actually asked Ying to lead troops to suppress the rebels, which shocked them even more. Did this guy suddenly wake up? Wang Xing heard everyone's disdainful looks and snorted coldly. Without any fear, he straightened his chest and abdomen, glanced around proudly, and said disdainfully. Huh, let me tell you, I am not a timid person. On the contrary, I am bold and courageous in killing. This time I lead troops to suppress the rebels. I will definitely win and make our great Qin proud. His Majesty, the current Emperor, is the most holy master throughout the ages. We should all imitate your Majesty and devote ourselves to the Qin dynasty until our death. It's just a traitor, I'm naturally not afraid of him. I will definitely get the credit for suppressing the rebels this time. After hearing Wang Xing's heroic statement, everyone's expressions became even weirder. Did this guy take the wrong medicine? Why are you so positive? You can even say this. However, everyone has to admire the other party's skill in flattering him. Even if His Majesty is not here, he can still slap him in a gentle or not serious way. He is really a master. At this time, Wang Xing stared at Du Yulin with burning eyes, as if he really hoped that he would agree to him. This. Du Yulin looked a little ugly. Although what Wang Xing said was high-sounding, he always felt that something was strange, as if something was hidden. But unfortunately, he couldn't find what it was. Du Yulin was silent for a moment, looked up at Wang Xing, and said, "Wang Shangshu, since you have already thought about it, go ahead and do it." As ordered, Wang Xing said with cupped hands, then turned around and walked out of the hall, heading to the household department to allocate food, grass, and troops. "Master, what Wang Shangshu said is not unreasonable. In that case, I am willing to go with Wang Shangshu at this time." A big man with a heavy back and a heavy waist stood up and said solemnly. "The last general is also willing to go with Wang Shangshu to suppress those rebels. The general will also wish." After the big man finished speaking, other generals also asked for orders. Du Yulin took a deep breath, shook his head, and said, "Everyone, you should stay here for the time being and protect Chang'an City." Then he narrowed his eyes and said in a deep voice, "Pass the order of our national master to summon all the entrances and exits guarding the palace and the capital, organize royal guards, and send additional forbidden troops to guard to the death. Do not relax at all. If there are rebels who attempt to invade, kill without mercy. As you command." All the generals bowed their hands and saluted, then turned and hurriedly left the hall. Soon, the originally bustling hall instantly returned to calm. "Well." Du Yulin sighed, looked at the empty hall, and said bitterly, "It seems that this rebellion is unavoidable. That's all. Since you can't avoid it, let's fight to the death. The worst possible outcome is death, so why should I be afraid?" Du Yulin closed his eyes slightly and murmured, "My Du family has been loyal for generations, and I, Du Yulin, am not afraid of dying on the battlefield. It is a pity that I was not able to see the prosperity of our great Qin with my own eyes. It is really a pity." He opened his eyes, looked at the blue sky outside the hall, and whispered, "Your Majesty, I will take a step forward and wait for your return." After saying that, Du Yulin strode towards the entrance of the palace. For the next time, he will sit on the city wall and defend Chang'an. At this time, Wang Xing, who had left the imperial preceptor's mansion, had a greasy smile on his face. "I'm really smart. I can still find such a high-sounding reason to leave here at such a critical moment in Chang'an City. Hey, maybe when everything settles, we can get a big credit." Wang Xing murmured to himself, with an excited look on his face. Suppressing the rebels is a great achievement, and when His Majesty returns, he may be able to take another step forward. Even if he can't advance one step further, he has left the dangerous place of Chang'an City, and it will be easy to save his life and even his wealth. So no matter what he did today was the best move. It is simply possible to attack when advancing, and to defend when retreating, absolutely foolproof. The more he thought about it, the bigger the smile on Wang Xing's face became, and he left quickly as if there was wind on his feet. He couldn't wait to prepare to lead his troops on an expedition. At the same time, in the far north of the Apocalypse territory, the majestic ancient trees are lush and green, covering the entire mountain range, stretching for millions of miles. The depths of the mountains are shrouded in clouds and mist all year round, like a fairyland, filled with strong aura. There are magnificent palaces built here, which are resplendent and exuding a rich golden divine light. They are majestic and give people an extremely shocking visual impact. At this moment, 9 charming figures suddenly appeared on the clouds outside the palace. Their sleeves fluttered, their beauty was unparalleled, their skin was crystal clear, as if made of white jade. They floated side by side in the air, like fairies descending to the earth, magnificent and beautiful. But their beautiful eyes, as light as water, were filled with earth-shaking murderous intent. P.S. I am really impressed. I originally planned to code more today, but the kitten vomited yellow water early in the morning and was listless. I was scared and rushed to the pet hospital. The doctor said it might be stress gastroenteritis caused by the cooling weather. Just like last time. I spent a few $100 on injections and medicine. I am really impressed. Ragdoll cats are too delicate. Once the temperature drops, they will get sick if they don't keep warm. They are more delicate than human cubs. Poor little cat. I forgot to take photos of the carefully arranged proposal scene, and it was just a mess. It was originally very beautiful, with light strips and candles. Below is the scene of the engagement party. I heard that a 3,000 yuan artificial diamond ring was given away for free in Luoyang, Henan. The photos are too ugly, so I won't post them. At the beginning, I gave the future empress her death. I became stronger because I was stupid. Author, Len Mian Buletin Leng. Chapter 304. 9 women stood in the void, overlooking the palace complex in the towering mountains below, with cold and frosty expressions on their faces. Beside them, swords were suspended, releasing terrifying waves, as if they could pierce the sky. Is this the Xiwei Fairy Palace? The girl on the far right of the 9 women, with a beautiful face and delicate features, said slowly, her voice as pleasant as an aureole. She was tall and slender, wearing a moon-white gauze dress, with black hair draped over her shoulders, curved eyebrows, bright eyes, a straight nose, moist red lips, and a slight arc at the corner of her mouth. Her whole pretty face was like a porcelain doll, delicate and charming. Well, I have confirmed that the area below is indeed the territory of the Xiwei Fairy Palace. A girl in green next to the girl nodded. She had white and tender skin, delicate features, and a graceful figure. She exuded a youthful and beautiful aura from head to toe. However, her beautiful eyes were filled with cold murderous intent, which made people palpitate. In that case, let's start to act and try to take down Xiwei Fairy Palace as quickly as possible. Another girl said, her tone was cold and emotionless, and her words could shock the people of Tiankai Domain. Take down Xiwei Fairy Palace, one of the transcendent holy places in Tiankai Domain? Isn't this crazy talk? Xiwei Fairy Palace has stood in Tiankai Domain for so many years, and it can be said that it has experienced countless storms, with a deep foundation and unfathomable depth. How could these girls take it down easily? But the other 8 girls did not feel any surprise at this sentence, but were calm and without any waves. It seemed that they had already thought about what to do before they came. Let's go. A girl waved her hand, and all the flying swords were retracted into her body. Swish, swish, swish. The 9 girls turned into 9 rays of light and rushed towards the palace below. Each of them had a graceful figure, floating like a startled wild goose, and their figures were agile and swift. In just a few breaths, they landed in the mountain range where Xiwei Fairy Palace was located. Then they each performed their duties. Some were responsible for assassination, some were responsible for breaking the Xiwei Fairy Palace's protective formation, some were responsible for disguise, some were responsible for vigilance and defense, and some were responsible for setting traps. In short, the 9 girls had a clear division of labor, were orderly, and not panicked at all, and their proficiency seemed to have been rehearsed thousands of times. When everything was ready, a massacre against Xiwei Fairy Palace was about to begin, and the 9 girls' eyes flashed with excited and bloodthirsty cold eyes. The main hall of Xiwei Fairy Palace is located on the top of the mountain, exuding a majestic atmosphere, magnificent and magnificent, full of fairy spirit and majestic and solemn. It seemed to tell the world with a high-handed attitude that Xiwei Fairy Palace is the absolute ruler of the Apocalypse domain, with a transcendent status and cannot be desecrated. At this moment, the ferry gate of Xiwei Ferry Palace was closed, and it seemed particularly quiet. Around the Xiwei Palace, a series of obscure and tyrannical auras permeated everywhere, covering the entire Xiwei Palace. Once an external enemy approached, it would definitely be noticed. Each mountain gate and palace gate was guarded by disciples of the Xiwei Palace, and the guards were extremely strict. These disciples were all wearing silver robes, with bright eyes, long swords on their backs, and a steady aura. Just looking at their faces, you can tell that they have profound cultivation. In the main hall of the Xiwei Palace, 3 old men sat in the first seat, with their eyes slightly closed, solemn appearance, and fierce aura on their bodies, like a mountain of infinite respect, giving people great pressure. 2 of them wore blue and white brocade robes, had grey beards, white hair, and a youthful face, and a ruddy complexion, looking like an immortal. Both of them are the supreme elders of the Xiwei Palace, with the strength of the 5th level of the Saint Realm. As for the old man sitting on the left, he was called an old man, but in fact he was a middle-aged man in black, with a rough face and a small mustache. Although he looked middle-aged, he looked a little wretched. He was also the Grand Elder of Xiwei Ferry Palace, Xiang Jinren. The 3 of them sat in the hall, arranged in a triangular shape, facing the outside of the hall. "Brother, I don't think anyone would dare to offend my Xiwei Ferry Palace, unless that person doesn't want to live." Xiang Jinren opened his eyes and said with a smile, "Don't be careless. After all, this is an extraordinary period. Everything needs to be done with caution." As soon as Xiang Jinren finished speaking, another white-bearded old man said lightly. He was Xiang Jinren's senior brother, Xiwei Jinren. "That's right. Now my Xiwei Ferry Palace is in danger. We must be cautious to avoid causing trouble for the sect and bringing disaster to ourselves." The old man who had never spoken also said slowly. He was also Xiang Jinren's senior brother, Zixiao Zhenjun. This time, the 3 of them did not participate in the campaign against Dakan, but stayed in Xiwei Ferry Palace. His mission is to stay in Xiwei Star Palace and prevent any villains from taking advantage of this opportunity to attack Xiwei Palace. Haha, I think we are worrying too much. Xiwei Palace has been standing in Tiankai domain for so long. It has encountered all kinds of dangers and has always survived them safely. Xiang Jinren still maintained his confidence and continued, "Besides, my Xiwei Palace still has a sect protection formation. Even if someone dares to pay attention to us, they can't escape from the formation." Hearing Xiang Jinren's words, the other 2 couldn't help but frowned and scolded softly, "Don't be careless. Now that half of the power of the imperial soldiers has been borrowed, it is no longer in peak condition. Be careful in everything. Don't worry, senior brother. I know what's going on. Just relax." Xiang Jinren waved his hand and smiled, but he curled his lips secretly, obviously not taking his senior brother's words to heart. In his eyes, their Xiwei Ferry Palace is the overlord-level existence in the Apocalypse domain. Who dares to offend? In fact, it's no wonder that he has such thoughts. After all, no one has come to provoke Xiwei Ferry Palace in the Apocalypse domain for 10,000 years. In his memory, since he started practicing, Xiwei Ferry Palace has been so quiet and peaceful, like a paradise on earth, a wonderful place for immortals. And every time he goes out, as long as he shows his identity as a disciple of Xiwei Ferry Palace, he will receive endless admiration and worship. So for Xiang Jinren, who has practiced smoothly to the Saint Realm, Xiwei Ferry Palace is his most warm and comfortable safe haven, and no one dares to offend it. Because he firmly believes that Xiwei Ferry Palace will never be in danger. Boom! At this moment, a series of earth-shaking sounds suddenly came from afar, spreading like thunder for dozens of miles. Then, groups of dazzling and brilliant rays of light bloomed, instantly illuminating the entire sky, brilliant and gorgeous, magnificent and beautiful. A series of hazy mists emerged in the rays of light, ethereal and dreamlike, illuminating the entire Ziwei Fairy Palace, turning it into a colorful ocean in an instant. The rays of light flowed, dazzling. This is. The sudden change immediately made Ziyi Yang Genren and the other two look puzzled, and they all opened their eyes. At the beginning, I gave the future empress her death. I became stronger because I was stupid. Author, Leng Mian Buletin Leng. Chapter 305. What's going on? Such a strong glow, is someone coming? Impossible, if someone is coming, we can't hide it from our perception. What's going on? What is this? Looking at the wonder in front of him, Ziyi Yang Genren frowned and murmured. At the same time, under the glow, he felt an inexplicable throbbing in his heart. That throbbing made him very uncomfortable. Not only did he have this feeling, but even the other two supreme elders had uncertain faces and solemn expressions. Ziyi Xiao Zhenjun felt something in his heart, subconsciously looked up, and his face froze. I saw giant meteorites falling from the sky, densely packed, covering the sky and the sun, as many as tens of thousands, smashing towards Ziwei Fairy Palace. Each of those meteorites contained terrifying energy, enough to kill the strong men in the Saint Realm, and many even carried the power to destroy the world. Their target is Ziwei Immortal Palace. It's bad. Enemies are coming. Quickly notify all disciples to prepare for the battle. No foreign enemies are allowed to enter our Ziwei Immortal Palace. Seeing the huge meteorite falling like an overwhelming force, Zixiao Zhenjun's face changed drastically. He screamed, hurriedly circulated his spiritual power, and flew into the sky. The other two saints also reacted quickly, flew out, and rushed into the void. At the same time, outside the hall, boom boom. The sky suddenly sounded with thunderous sounds, as if the sky was angry. Suddenly, all the disciples outside looked in the direction of the sound. The next second, everyone was stunned. In the distant sky, I don't know when a group of dazzling rays of light appeared, colorful and beautiful. But under this beautiful rosy light, one after another dark cracks appeared, spreading out, covering the entire void like a spider web. Huge meteorites poured out of the dark cracks, cutting through the void, and fell down with a roar like a comet impact. They stared at the distant void in amazement, their expressions were dull, and their faces were full of horror, as if they had seen a ghost. In front of them, one after another huge meteorite dragged a long tail, with a whistling and violent sound of breaking through the air, flying towards their direction. There were many meteorites, each of which emitted a blazing and dazzling glow, as heavy as a mountain, crushing the void, and there was a kind of destructive momentum in a trance, which made people desperate and suffocated. Damn it, how could these meteorites appear out of thin air? Retreat quickly. A disciple shouted in horror. There were also disciples who showed disdain and said indifferently, "What are you afraid of? Our Ziwei Fairy Palace has a protective formation." As soon as these words came out, it was like a settling stone, which calmed down many of the originally panicked Ziwei Fairy Palace disciples. Yes, we have a sect protection formation in Ziwei Immortal Palace. What is there to be afraid of? Although these meteorites are fierce, their attack power should not be very strong. Our sect protection formation can block the full force of the saint. We can completely resist it. Quickly activate the sect protection formation. Many disciples waved their arms and shouted. Although these meteorites are terrifying, they did not take them seriously, believing that the sect protection formation of Ziwei Immortal Palace is enough to block the meteorites. Boom boom. Then, at the urging of these disciples, the defense formation outside Ziwei Immortal Palace was fully activated. In an instant, endless runes flashed and burst out with extremely brilliant light. Buzz buzz. In an instant, circles of mysterious rune fluctuations spread out from the sect protection formation, like ripples, covering hundreds of kilometers in radius, forming a layer of pale yellow barrier, like a barrier, solid and tough. When these ripples rippled on the bodies of the disciples, they instantly disappeared into thin air, turning into strands of energy and merging into their bodies. Under the nourishment of energy, their vitality was restored a lot, and they were full of energy and fighting spirit. This made all the disciples of Xiwei Fairy Palace couldn't help but cheer excitedly, and they were in high spirits. Swish! However, at this moment, a meteorite actually passed through the formation without stopping and flew straight towards Xiwei Fairy Palace. The meteorite was surrounded by blazing flames, and wherever it passed, it burned a scorch mark in the space, showing its terrible power. It was extremely fast, and appeared in front of the group of disciples in the blink of an eye like a meteor chasing the moon, less than 100 meters away, which made their faces change suddenly. Quick! Stop it! An elder of Xiwei Fairy Palace roared loudly. His body was full of golden light, holding a golden knife in his hand, and slashed it fiercely. Clang! The crisp sound of metal and iron colliding exploded. Boom! The elder was shocked and flew backwards. The golden knife in his hand broke into 2 pieces, his knuckles cracked, blood flowed, and he looked miserable. The eyes of the disciples jumped, and they were all shocked. You know, the elder is a strong man in the realm of Zhandao, only 1 step away from being a saint. But just a meteorite broke his weapon. You can imagine the terrifying power of these meteorites. However, what everyone didn't know was that something even more terrifying was still to come. The flames on the meteorite burst out instantly, burning the golden knife, and then swept towards the elder with the remaining force. Puff! The elder was unable to dodge and was engulfed by the blazing flames. He was burned to ashes in an instant. It was a horrible sight, with blood and flesh all over his body. Seeing this, the remaining disciples of Xiwei Immortal Palace all gasped and their eyelids twitched wildly. Everything happened in a flash, and at this moment they realized one thing. The sect protection formation is ineffective. How is this possible? Is the formation base broken? The pupils of the crowd shrank, and their faces were filled with deep shock and panic. They desperately discovered that the sect protection formation had lost its most important protective function. Everyone was horrified. You know, the sect protection formation of Xiwei Immortal Palace is a formation inherited from ancient times, and it is very powerful. Even saints can't do anything about it. However, now it has been declared ineffective. What on earth is going on? Where did the meteorite come from? Run away! Run away! Run away! Run away! Hurry up, or you'll die! For a moment, many disciples fled in panic, not caring about any rules at all, hating their parents for not giving them 2 more legs, and running wildly. In an instant, the entire square was in chaos, with wailing, screaming, and cursing filling the entire Xiwei Fairy Palace. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. At the beginning, I gave the future empress her death. I became stronger because I was stupid. Author, Len Mian Buletin Leng. Chapter 306. All the disciples ran out of Xiwei Palace like crazy, wanting to leave this hellhole. They offered their treasures and weapons, and used their best to perform magic, flying swords, riding clouds, or turning into a long rainbow across the sky to avoid the attack of meteorites. In an instant, countless streams of light flashed in the sky of Xiwei Palace. But even if everyone fled desperately, it was still useless. Their speed was too slow, and it was a world of difference compared to those meteorites. They had no time to escape. The meteorites were surrounded by blazing rays of light, exuding a majestic pressure. Bang bang bang. The next moment, a series of earth-shaking noises suddenly broke out, and endless sparks rushed into the sky, illuminating the sky. Bang, bang, bang. One after another, gorgeous fireworks bloomed in the void, turning into brilliant flower rain, and blooming a strange red light in the dim night, which was extremely beautiful, but full of the smell of death. Under such a gorgeous and weird scene, a strong smell of blood permeated, which was extremely pungent and nauseating, and almost made people vomit. Swish! 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 In an instant, the meteorites in the sky completely submerged the Xiwei Fairy Palace and wreaked havoc in the buildings of the Fairy Palace. It instantly turned into a dead ruin, with no grass growing, a mess, thick smoke and dust, as if the doomsday catastrophe had come, miserable. As palaces were destroyed one by one, countless disciples of the Xiwei Fairy Palace died. Ah! The shrill and painful howls resounded through the sky, shaking people's hearts. In just a blink of an eye, more than thousands of Xiwei Immortal Palace disciples were buried under the meteorites, and the blood stained the sky, which was a horrible sight. Outside the Xiwei Immortal Palace, blood stained a large area of land red, and corpses were everywhere. A solemn and tragic atmosphere spread. No! Save me! The shrill cries for help resounded through the clouds, making people's hearts and gallbladders break, and those who heard them were sad and wept. However, the cries for help from these disciples could not stop the meteorites from falling, but only brought more meteorites to fall. For a time, there was grief everywhere, and it was horrible to see. I don't want to die yet, save me quickly. Ah, I don't want to die. The shrill screams were endless, resounding through the sky, and blood flowers floated up, staining the world with blood. In a short moment, the huge Xiwei Immortal Palace turned into a Shura hell, with corpses piled up like mountains and blood flowing like rivers. At this moment, Zixiao Zhenjun and the other three finally withstood the bombardment of meteorites and rushed out of Xiwei Xian Palace, extremely angry. Shua! 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 The next moment, three powerful auras broke through the nine heavens, like a flood and beast, making the whole world quiet. At this moment, their faces were as cold as frost, their eyes were extremely cold, and their eyes were bloodshot. Especially Zixiao Zhenjun, his fists were clenched, his nails were deeply embedded in his flesh, his lips were bitten, and the scarlet blood slowly flowed down the gap between his teeth, which was hideous and terrifying. Asshole! Zixiao Zhenjun roared, looking at the scene in front of him with murderous intent, and his eyes were bloodshot. Damn thing, dare to break into my Xiwei Xian Palace, you are looking for death. Zixiao Zhenjun gritted his teeth, clenched his fists, his nails were deeply embedded in his palms, and a little bit of bright red blood oozed out. He was extremely angry, his chest was heaving violently, and he was furious. He never expected to encounter such an incredible thing. His dignified Xiwei Immortal Palace actually suffered such a heavy blow. Shua! Under everyone's attention, a sword light suddenly tore through the void, surged out from the body of Zixiao Zhenjun, turned into a sword that could support the sky, and slashed directly at those huge meteorites. Kaka! Where the sword could reach, everything was annihilated, and it was indestructible. It instantly cut off the meteorites in half and split most of them. At the same time, the other two Supreme Elders also showed their magical powers. Buzz buzz buzz. The next moment, two huge and fierce beasts emerged, releasing a monstrous and murderous aura, and spewed out a monstrous black flame, swallowing up the giant meteorites and burning them all. With the actions of these Supreme Elders, the remaining disciples stabilized their minds and used defensive magic weapons to resist the whistling meteorites. In an instant, various divine lights flashed, runes intertwined, forming layers of light curtains, wrapping the Xiwei Immortal Palace. However, even if they fought hard, they were still powerless in the face of the dense meteorite group. In a short while, the Xiwei Immortal Palace had become a ruin with broken walls and countless palaces collapsed and in a mess. Many disciples were buried alive in the ruins. More disciples did not dare to stay here and continued to run outside. When some disciples just stepped out of the mountain gate, before they could breathe a sigh of relief, they saw that the lush ancient trees around them suddenly trembled. Then, the tree trunks broke apart, and countless dense vines stretched out from them, like green dragons, entangled all the disciples. These branches were extremely thick, and each one contained destructive power. Ah! Puff! Suddenly, a series of heart-wrenching screams of pain came one after another. These branches swept over and easily pierced through the bodies of the disciples. Blood gushed out, rendering the space red, and the pungent smell of blood filled the air. All the Xiwei Immortal Palace disciples who escaped were entangled by the vines and hung in the air. Hiss! Seeing this scene, other sect disciples in the distance all gasped, frightened to death. What happened to Xiwei Immortal Palace? How come the originally quiet and peaceful paradise, the land of immortals, is now full of murderous intentions? No one had expected that the originally good Xiwei Immortal Palace would suddenly be attacked and turned into Shura Purgatory overnight. This is simply unbelievable. When Zixiao Zhenjun saw this scene, his eyes were extremely red, and his murderous intent surged to the extreme, and his whole body was full of murderous aura. He was the supreme elder of Xiwei Immortal Palace, but he actually saw his disciples being slaughtered with his own eyes. How could he not be furious? He waved his arms, and the surging spiritual power gushed out, instantly crushing the vines that bound these disciples. Then Zixiao Zhenjun looked up at the sky, his eyes emitting endless hatred. Who the hell are you? Get out here! The voice spread, but there was no response. It was extremely quiet, as if he was the only one in the world. Humph! You are playing tricks. Since you are unwilling to show up, I will pull you out myself. Swoosh! 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 Then, he turned into a stream of light and flew towards the core of the meteorite group. He wanted to find out who it was. Whoever dared to act wild in Xiwei Fairy Palace must pay the price. At the beginning, I gave the future empress her death. I became stronger because I was stupid. Author, Leng Mian Buletin Leng. Chapter 307. Brush. True Lord Zixiao was incredibly fast and arrived at the center of the meteorites in a blink of an eye. The next moment, before his eyes, the densely packed meteorites suddenly erupted into extremely dazzling blue-gold light. Then, the meteorites suddenly hovered and gathered together. Then, 9 figures slowly walked out and stood in the center of the meteorite group, facing True Lord Zixiao head-on. True Lord Zixiao frowned slightly, looked at them carefully, a trace of suspicion flashed in his eyes, and asked in a deep voice. Who are you, and why did you attack my Xiwei Immortal Palace? He could sense that these strange women were not weaker than him. This made Zhenjun Zixiao feel scruples in his heart, and he slightly restrained the anger he showed just now. But it was obvious that these 9 girls did not want to talk to him. Kill! A cold shout rang out, and the 9 girls took action together. In an instant, 9 dazzling sword lights crossed the sky, tore the sky, and slashed at True Lord Zixiao. Their sword energy is fierce and domineering, and its sharpness is so sharp that it can make the sun and the moon dim. Bang! 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 The sword light fell, the void trembled, and the earth collapsed. In just an instant, True Lord Zixiao was overwhelmed by the terrifying sword light. His face changed wildly, and he hurriedly waved his arms, creating a majestic and vast small copper tower, blooming with gorgeous auspicious clouds. Dang! 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 9 terrifying sword energy struck the small copper tower, and there were bursts of sounds of gold and iron, and sparks flew everywhere. Although True Lord Zixiao tried his best to mobilize the small copper tower to defend, he was still blown away by the terrifying sword energy, and streaks of golden blood spilled from the corners of his mouth. He was wounded by his origin. hiss. Seeing this scene, Master Ziwei and Master Xiang, who had just arrived here, couldn't help but take a breath of cold air and were extremely shocked. Senior brother Xiao was actually injured. Who are these girls? How do they have such terrifying power? True Lord Xiao was also very shocked. He stared at the 9 young women opposite, his eyes filled with murderous intent, and said in a deep voice, "Who are you?" He did not expect that the other party's strength was so terrifying. He even suspected that the other party was not a human monk. However, the opponent ignored him at all and continued to use his killing blow. The next moment, the 9 sword energies came across again, carrying unparalleled murderous intent across the 8 desolations and Liu He, and slashed at True Lord Xiao. Court death. True Lord Xiao's eyes showed a cold light, and he mobilized the small copper tower with all his strength, stirring up billions of meters of purple light, and came forward to fight. Boom! In an instant, the 2 forces collided violently, erupting with a deafening sound, and terrifying waves raging in all directions. After all, True Lord Xiao is a supreme elder-level existence, and his strength is unfathomable. He roared crazily, used all his strength, controlled the small copper tower, and shook it violently. In an instant, one after another extremely thick purple thunder and lightning surged out, like a flood breaking a bank, facing the terrifying sword energy, making a deafening sound, like rolling thunder from the sky. Bang! 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 The sword energy and purple thunder and lightning collided violently, swallowing and annihilating each other. Finally, one of the sword energy and purple thunder and lightning cancelled each other out, exploded and dissipated in the air. The other 8 swords took advantage of the situation to attack. True Lord Xiao's pupils shrank suddenly, and he sacrificed a purple jade seal without hesitation. Boom! The jade seal swelled in the storm, and in the blink of an eye it became 100 feet tall, and quickly became 100 feet tall. A god with 3 heads and 6 arms was carved on the jade seal, and a huge purple mist hung down, covering the top of his head to resist the sword energy. However, even the purple mist couldn't resist it. The sword energy roared and cut in fiercely, leaving hideous scars on his body dripping with blood. Ah! Zhenjun Xiao was in pain and let out a shrill wail. Boom! The remaining power of the sword energy struck True Lord Xiao's chest and knocked him away. True Lord Xiao was overturned by the terrifying waves, fell into the sky, and hit the bottom hard. Bang! In the shocked eyes of these disciples, True Lord Xiao bumped into the mountain gate of Ziwei Immortal Palace. Suddenly, the mountain gate of Ziwei Immortal Palace shattered, dust, smoke and debris flew everywhere. True Lord Xiao was buried in the ruins. Ahem, puff. True Lord Xiao struggled to crawl out of the ruins, his hair disheveled, his clothes torn, and in a miserable state. His face was extremely gloomy, he gritted his teeth, and his eyes were full of anger. It's so scary. Who are they? All the disciples were stunned and shocked, and all of them were silent. Asshole! True Lord Xiao was completely angry. He had never been so embarrassed as he is now. Purple clouds filled the air, and an extremely blazing glow erupted from his body. Mysterious symbols flew out of his body one after another, surrounding him and shining brightly. Buzzing. Each rune exudes sacred and inexplicable fluctuations, exuding ancient divine patterns of law, intertwined together to form a mysterious and obscure pattern. It is surrounded by lavender clouds, hazy and misty, like a sacred realm. Boom! True Lord Xiao stepped on the ground with the solace of his feet, rose into the air, stood in mid-air, looked down at the 9 women opposite, and said coldly, "No one can save you today." As he spoke, purple clouds surged all over his body, and a huge and powerful force was brewing around him, and his aura became stronger and stronger. At this time, the 9 women on the opposite side finally stopped attacking. They looked at each other, and then they formed seals in tacit understanding, and whispered at the same time. 9 Nether Soul Locking Technique. In an instant, the void trembled. Then, one after another, extremely dark beams of light shot out from their fingertips and flew towards Xiao Zhenjun. These beams of light, like the resentful souls of the netherworld ghosts, exuded an extremely evil aura. What was even more bizarre was that this beam of light contained a powerful confinement force, blocking everything, even the space was still. And Xiao Zhenjun also became extremely stiff under this power, and slowly fell backwards. At the beginning, I gave the future empress her death. I became stronger because I was stupid. Author, Len Mian Buletin Leng. Chapter 308. The 9 women moved as fast as a phantom, and they completed the arrangement in a blink of an eye. You, what did you do? Xiao Zhenjun fell to the ground powerlessly, and suddenly felt stiff all over, moving slowly, as if trapped in a quagmire. He was horrified, and his eyes were full of panic and anxiety. He could feel that these strange beams of light were extraordinary. Xiao Zhenjun did not dare to neglect, and used all his strength to activate the protective magic weapon to try to block these dark beams of light. But he underestimated the strength of these beams of light. Puff! The beam of light penetrated the protective divine light condensed outside his body, pierced into his skin, and then quickly sank into his body, wandering in his meridians. What kind of magic is this? Xiao Zhenjun was horrified and felt an unprecedented crisis. Damn it! Xiao Zhenjun cursed angrily, and tried his best to turn the vitality in his body to break free from the imprisonment. However, it was in vain. The power of the imprisonment was very strong, and no matter how he resisted, it was useless. Finally, this strange force wrapped him up and imprisoned him in place, unable to move at all. This made him tremble with fear, his soul was trembling, and he was so scared that his liver and gallbladder were broken, and he felt a strong sense of uneasiness in his heart. At this moment, Xiao Zhenjun felt like a fish on a chopping board, waiting to be slaughtered. He had not experienced this feeling for many years, and he felt a deep sense of helplessness and despair in his heart. At the same time, it also made him feel extremely aggrieved. The great elder of Xiwei Fairy Palace, one of the strongest people second only to Nangongyuan's, has now become a prisoner. Moreover, he was suppressed by several women, which was simply a disgrace. Before he could think about it, the next moment, 9 peerless beauties came in, stood in 9 directions in an instant, pinched their hands, and released a dazzling divine light, reflecting the sky. 9 Nether Soul Locking Formation, start! 9 peerless beauties shouted, their slender jade fingers cut through the void, outlining a vast and magical formation. Damn it, stop them! Xiao Zhenjun's face changed drastically, and he shouted in panic. At this time, Ziwei Zhenren and Xiang Zhenren rushed back. The 2 supreme elders did not dare to hesitate, and joined forces to kill, each using their magical powers to blow up the sky and destroy everything. The terrible fluctuations swept across the wilderness, the entire mountain forest was shaking, and the birds and beasts fled in fear. Boom! Thunder exploded, the void trembled, the earth cracked, and one crack after another spread to the distance. The scene was horrifying. However, the 9 Nether Soul Locking Formation did not move, solid and immortal, and dissolved the attacks of the 2 supreme elders. How is this possible? Xiang Zhenren was horrified, his eyes widened, and he showed an unbelievable expression. Ziwei Zhenren was also shocked, and his pupils shrank suddenly. The 2 had practiced for thousands of years, and their strength had already reached the extreme. Especially when the 2 joined forces, it was even more terrifying. Even if an ordinary 5th level Saint Realm expert met the 2, he would die on the spot. However, such a terrible attack could not do anything to the so-called 9 Nether Soul Locking Formation. There was only one possibility, that is, the 9 women who set up the formation were much stronger than the 2 of them. Thinking of this, the 2 people's hearts were violently surging, and their minds were shocked. How is it possible? Ziyang Genren muttered to himself, looking at the 9 women with a trace of fear in his eyes. The strength of these 9 beautiful women has reached a point that they can't guess at all. The funny thing is that not long ago, he thought that no one dared to come and invade Ziwei Fairy Palace. Boom! The next moment, the 9 women activated the seal again. In an instant, one light curtain after another lit up, interweaving a dense chain of order, and continued to seal towards Zixiao Zhenjun. Their goal was simple and clear. First defeat the most powerful of the 3 supreme elders, and then defeat them one by one. Suppress them. One of the blue-skirted women shouted delicately, pinching her fingers to activate the black beams. Suddenly, the black beams burst out with dazzling light, forming a huge net. Wherever they passed, the void was distorted and deformed, and the ripples in space spread, wrapping around Zixiao Zhenjun. Damn it! Ziwei Zhenren shouted, fighting with all his strength. Unfortunately, he was imprisoned and couldn't move at all. The formation was in operation, and 9 thick light pillars fell from the sky, covering Zixiao Zhenjun, and instantly closed the area around him for dozens of feet. As this huge formation was activated, Zixiao Zhenjun suddenly felt cold all over, and his soul seemed to be pulled. Crack, crack, crack. The protective divine light outside his body was easily wiped out, and then a dark beam pierced his shoulder. Ah! Accompanied by a scream, a crackling sound of bones breaking came from Zixiao Zhenjun's body, and Zixiao Zhenjun screamed continuously. In Zixiao Zhenjun was pierced by 9 divine rainbows, his 5 internal organs were destroyed, and his body almost collapsed. Strands of golden blood flowed from the corners of his mouth, his whole body was in great pain, his bones were broken, and blood was oozing from his 7 orifices. He looked horrible. Who are you? I am the elder Taishao of Ziwei Fairy Palace. Let me go, otherwise you will never leave alive. Zixiao Zhenjun roared viciously, angry and furious. He could no longer care about so many things, and the key was to save his life first. Humph! Noisy. However, the 9 women didn't bother to pay attention to him, and continued to sneer. Then, the 9 people used their secret method again, shooting out dazzling divine rainbows, and rushed towards Zixiao Zhenjun. Damn it, Zixiao Zhenjun's eyelids twitched wildly. In an instant, the sword light filled the sky, covering the sky and drowning him. Ah! The scream resounded through the sky. Zixiao Zhenjun was chopped away, his body was covered with blood and suffered severe injuries. And the armor on his body was dim and obviously damaged. 9 dark beams trapped Zixiao Zhenjun in it, like a prison, suppressing him. Zixiao Zhenjun was nailed in the void, his body was covered with blood, scars, his breath was weak, and his eyes were filled with despair. He never thought that he would end up like this. Seeing the miserable appearance of Zixiao Zhenjun, the other disciples trembled all over, their faces were extremely pale, and they looked at the 9 girls in the sky with horror, their eyes full of awe and fear. They couldn't even think of running away, as if a magic knife was held on their necks, and they were shivering with coldness. And Ziwei Zhenren and Ziyang Zhenren were not much better. Although they were not injured, they were already terrified in their hearts, and they were no longer as proud as before. They saw that these 9 people were all in the realm of saints, and their combat power was amazing, far superior to the 2 of them. What kind of force is this? Ziwei Zhenren and Ziyang Zhenren looked solemn, and they were puzzled. You know, these 9 women are beautiful, graceful, and elegant, and they can be called the most beautiful in the world. If they belonged to a sect in the Tiankai domain, they would not be able to recognize them. After all, the existence of saints is very rare in the entire human race. However, they had never heard of or seen these 9 women, and had no idea where they came from. Moreover, they had never heard of such a strange force in the apocalypse domain. Could it be that these women came from outside the domain, from superpowers in other domains? The more Ziwei Genren and Xiang Genren thought about it, the more they felt it was possible. Only this possibility could explain the situation in front of them. No matter where you come from, don't think about leaving alive today, Xiang Genren said in a deep voice. His tone was extremely cold, revealing a chilling murderous intent. He was tall and sturdy, with a gloomy face, and a blazing purple fire rising from his body, burning like a god, making people afraid. Then he looked at Ziwei Genren and said in a deep voice, "Brother, please bring out the Imperial soldiers. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. At the beginning, I gave the future empress her death. I became stronger because I was stupid." Author, Leng Mian Buletin Leng. Chapter 309. Ziwei Genren nodded, his eyes flickered, revealing a look of determination. "Well, now it seems that this is the only way." After the voice fell, Ziwei Genren's eyes were deep, there was a divine light flickering between his eyebrows, and a majestic aura permeated. At this point, only by offering the imperial weapon can the 9 mysterious women be restrained. Otherwise, only death awaits them. Shua. A dazzling beam of light suddenly rushed out of Ziwei Fairy Palace. This beam of light penetrated the sky and went straight into the depths of the clouds, as if it was going to pierce the sky. A terrifying and boundless imperial power burst out from the beam of light. Boom! The sky shook, the mountains and rivers shattered, and the hall was crumbling. The majestic auras swept all around, as if it turned into endless thunder, making the world tremble. A divine spear lay in the air, blooming with infinite brilliance. The next moment, this purple glowing spear appeared in the hands of Ziwei Genren, which was 100 meters long, and seemed to be made of thunder, exuding a tremendous pressure. The emperor weapon was born, the purple light shone in the sky, and the purple air was surging. Instantly, the spiritual energy within 1,000 miles rolled in, gathered on the spear, and burst out billions of divine clouds. This spear is an emperor weapon, the ancestral weapon of Ziwei Fairy Palace, and even contains a trace of fairy power. Once this thing is activated, it will surely be earth-shattering and have the power to destroy the world. Ha 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 ha. Once the emperor weapon comes out, you will die. Ziwei Genren, who was trapped in the void, laughed up to the sky, and his laughter was rampant and overbearing. When the emperor weapon takes action, no matter how strong the background of these people is, no matter how powerful they are, they will never be able to resist it. Because the emperor weapon is the most powerful force in this world, it is enough to suppress the eternity, crush the sea of stars, destroy everything, and destroy the world. What's more, they are just 9 saints. These 9 girls are indeed strange and unpredictable, and their strength is strong, but the emperor's soldiers are enough to wipe them out with one blow. Boom! Sure enough, just as Ziwei Genjun laughed wildly, the black beam that originally burst out with strange pressure suddenly vibrated, making waves of wailing sounds, and quickly dimmed. In just a moment, the infinite light that originally pierced the void suddenly extinguished. Everything returned to calm. The seriously injured Zixiao Genjun finally regained his freedom. Ha ha ha, you are dead. Zixiao Genjun covered his chest. Although his body was in great pain, the joy in his heart made him laugh like crazy, unscrupulous, and extremely arrogant. The disciples of Ziwei Fairy Palace also breathed a sigh of relief, showing the expression of relief that they had survived the disaster, and began to get excited, with a proud look on their faces. Once the emperor's soldiers appeared, who would compete with them? This is the true foundation of their Ziwei Immortal Palace standing in the Tiankai domain. These 9 women are only at the saint level, so what if they have extraordinary origins? In front of the imperial soldiers, they are all ants. The disciples raised their heads in anticipation, not daring to blink, ready to see the style of the imperial soldiers. After all, there is not always a chance to see the power of the imperial soldiers. I saw Xuanhuan holding the imperial soldiers, standing in the void, like an invincible god of war, looking down on the 8 wastelands and 6 directions. He raised his hand to grasp the imperial soldiers, pointed at the 9 women, and spoke in an indifferent voice. "Since you are stubborn, I will send you to reincarnation today." His eyes were dazzling, his brilliance was surging, and his body was emitting a vast divine brilliance. Xuanhuan urged his spiritual power to inject it into the imperial weapon. In an instant, the divine light surged, and endless purple air gushed out, making him look like a peerless divine emperor, terrifying and awe-inspiring. OM. The imperial weapon trembled, shook violently, and exuded a monstrous and fierce power. In an instant, the whole world was shrouded in a murderous aura, which was horrifying. Xuanhuan suddenly exerted force with both hands and threw it fiercely into the void, and suddenly a dazzling imperial light burst out. The long spear imperial weapon soared in the air, emitting vast and terrifying fluctuations, like a purple sun descending, illuminating the heavens, magnificent and awe-inspiring. Xuanhuan had a ferocious face and roared, "Die!" Boom! The divine spear cut through the clouds and stabbed down suddenly. The void collapsed, and the terrifying power fluctuations spread in all directions. Xuanhuan, who had just escaped, stared at the scene intently, his eyes full of pleasure. He wanted to see with his own eyes how these 9 women died. But the next moment, Xuanhuan's heart suddenly trembled, and he felt extremely uneasy, as if something was wrong. Their expressions were too calm. Yes, that's right, they were too calm, and they didn't even blink, just standing there quietly. It was as if they regarded the imperial soldiers as nothing, and they were not affected at all, and they were still calm and fearless. However, this thought was only fleeting, and Xuanhuan quickly shook his head. "How is this possible?" he frowned and murmured, his face full of disbelief. "This is not in line with common sense." Boom! In a flash, the imperial soldiers hit the formation barrier formed by the 9 women, making a loud noise and bursting out with the power to destroy everything. However, the imperial soldiers failed to penetrate the formation, but only spread a circle of ripples, and then shrank again, flew into Xuanhuan's hands, and restored their original appearance. Xuanhuan's heart jumped, and the indifferent expression on his face gradually solidified. The 9 girls had calm eyes and a cold curve at the corners of their mouths. Luoxiu, who was dressed in a white dress, smiled faintly and said, "It's just a half-wasted imperial weapon. Do you think you can hurt us?" The voice was as pleasant as pearls falling on a plate, but it was full of sarcasm and spread throughout the venue. "I didn't expect that the imperial weapon of your Xiwei fairy palace was only this powerful. It's really embarrassing. Hey, I thought the imperial weapon of Xiwei fairy palace was so powerful, but it turned out to be just this. Rubbish. Waste. Lalilal." The other women also shook their heads and mocked. Puff, Xuanhuan almost vomited blood. Xuanhuan and many disciples of Xiwei fairy palace also widened their eyes, their faces full of disbelief. Especially Xuanhuan, he couldn't believe it. Although this imperial weapon did take away a part of its power to attack Dakin, it was definitely not that bad, right? What was going on? Humph, Xuanhuan looked embarrassed and snorted coldly, "Even if only half of the power is left, I can kill you on the spot." Although he said so, his uneasiness became more intense, and he always felt that things were beyond his expectations. Luoxiu smiled slightly, and then waved her jade arm. Then, a black clay pot slowly floated out and hovered beside the women. The body of the pot was as deep as the night, and a mask pattern with a green face and fangs faintly emerged, filled with a chill, which made people shiver. And when the clay pot appeared, the whole world seemed to suddenly darken, and a boundless evil spirit swept over, covering the sky and the earth, making people palpitate. Everything fell into silence, only darkness was flowing. Everyone's eyes, inadvertently cast on the clay pot, and a chill involuntarily surged in their hearts. Hiss! What the hell is this thing? It can't be an imperial weapon too. Everyone gasped, their faces turned pale, and their eyes showed a look of extreme horror. Xuanhuan's pupils also shrank, and his face became particularly ugly. The next moment, Luoxu reached out and gently took the black earthenware jar in her hand. I thought it would be useless, but I didn't expect that the master was more foresighted, she whispered, and a smile appeared on her delicate snow-white face. Then Luoxu threw it gently. Swoosh! The black earthenware jar turned into a black light and flew out, rising in the wind, instantly covering this piece of heaven and earth, blocking all the secrets and vitality. P.S. I am packing things today, and I will clean up tomorrow. I will call Hualala, and I can return the lease the day after tomorrow. But my lease is not due until February 12th, and if I quit now, it means I'm throwing away more than 20 days of rent, and I'm paying 1,100 yuan a month. But my partner is going home, and there's no point in living here alone. I'm torn, I don't want to live here alone, and I don't want to give up the landlord, who still owes me 166 yuan. But I've lived in this rental house for half a year, and I'm a little reluctant to leave. It's time to go home for the new year, and I'll rent a house somewhere else next year. I'll have nothing to do after I go home, and I'll try to update 10,000 every day. At the beginning, I gave the future empress her death. I became stronger because I was stupid. Author, Len Mian Buletin Leng. Chapter 310. A strange and unpredictable force of terror emanated from the inside of the jar, shattering everything and swallowing everything inside. Immediately afterwards, countless strange and mysterious lines emerged, intertwined and flashed, densely packed, filling the void, making people's scalp numb. These strange veins exude the atmosphere of ancient vicissitudes, like an ancient curse. Every line seems to represent the birth, destruction, and rebirth of the world, with an inexplicable mysterious power permeating the air. In an instant, all the monks in Xuanhuan Immortal Palace felt a strange feeling. A tremor originating from the soul rises from the deepest part of my heart. It's like this world is about to disappear. They couldn't help but have a picture appear in their minds. Deep in the galaxy, in the forbidden area of life, a woman wearing a bronze mask is standing quietly, overlooking this vast world. Her eyes seem to be able to see through everything, with indifference and nobility, but also seem to contain compassion for the common people. A ray of grey light bloomed from her eyes, scanning the entire universe and starry sky, seeming to have insight into countless epochs and peek into the endless future. Among these scenes, there are majestic figures one after another, standing on the top of the world and controlling the universe. Some people wear golden battle armor, some ride on precious chariots, some ride on dragons and snakes, some drive magical birds. But the final result, without exception, all went to destruction. One world after another is destroyed, one civilization after another is annihilated, one strong man after another rises and falls, billions of living beings are wailing and crying, and they are extremely miserable. There are endless images reflected in her eyes, and each scene represents a piece of history. And in these seemingly endless years, this woman has always stood at the top of the starry sky, overlooking all living beings, watching everything silently. In front of her, there stood an altar that reached the sky, and endless beams of light shot into the sky, gathering together to form huge stars one after another. Like a path to immortality. I don't know how long it took, but the endless pictures drifted away in the wind and disappeared. Her body gradually became hazy, becoming illusory and hazy, and finally disappeared completely. Only a simple and incomplete black earthen jar was left, quietly suspended in the void. Who is she? What kind of existence is this? Ah! A disciple from Xiwei Immortal Palace couldn't help but exclaimed, and sat paralyzed on the ground in fear. Others were also trembling, with a creepy feeling in their hearts, a fear coming from the deepest part of their souls. What did you just see? It's terrible, it's really terrible. That's definitely not something we can peep into. Is that a legendary figure? It's unimaginable, unbelievable. It's too scary, it's really too scary. Is he the legendary immortal? Immortal? I think it's the devil. Everyone looked at each other in shock, with a look of deathly horror on their faces. At this moment, when they looked at the dilapidated earthen jar in front of them, they felt that they were in a netherworld and purgatory. The boundless meaning of death filled the surroundings and wanted to bury them completely. At this time, no matter how stupid you are, you know that this earthen jar is not trivial. This has even completely surpassed the scope of ordinary imperial soldiers, reaching another incredible level. Master Xiwei, who was holding an imperial weapon with a spear, was also frightened by this sudden turn of events. The hairs on his body stood on end, and strong uneasiness and panic emerged in his heart. Buzz! With a violent roar, the imperial spear soldiers suddenly erupted into a dazzling silver-white glow. Their whole bodies were trembling, and they felt as if they were facing a formidable enemy, even more like they were shivering. It seems to be aware of the danger. This, even the imperial soldiers are afraid of. Master Xiwei felt the tremor of the imperial soldiers in her hands, and was so frightened that the hairs all over her body stood on end. A weapon that can make imperial soldiers feel fear, what level would that be? Master Xiwei's heart trembled, and he did not dare to continue to speculate, because that was simply not a field that he could touch. The only thing he can do now is to mobilize the imperial soldiers in his hands to the extreme and stand ready. The next moment, the Spear Emperor's soldiers trembled violently, and wisps of bright and dazzling silver light bloomed, sweeping away in all directions like a tide. A dazzling silver-white stream of light shot out from the spear, striking straight down towards the black earthen jar in the void, splitting the void. The unparalleled power can tear apart and kill in all directions, seemingly capable of destroying everything. Clang! There was only a loud noise and sparks flying. A melodious and dull collision sound echoed in all directions. The pitch-black earthen jar suddenly collided with the purple-gold spear, bursting out with divine energy, tearing apart the surrounding space and annihilating it. The purple-gold spear trembled violently and was knocked back several feet. However, the black earthen jar was not damaged at all, it just shook slightly. Hiss, how is this possible? Xiwei's eyes widened and her pupils shrank suddenly. At this moment, although the imperial spear was still bursting with overwhelming power, the black clay pot only swayed slightly, without any damage, not even a trace left. That was the imperial weapon. Everyone in Xiwei Fairy Palace widened their eyes. What on earth was this black clay pot? It was so hard that even the imperial weapon could not do anything. It couldn't even stir up a ripple. Xiwei Genren was sweating profusely, his face was full of panic, and the sense of crisis in his heart became stronger and stronger. This clay pot was too weird, it was beyond imagination. The next moment, the spiritual power in Xiwei Genren's body surged and boiled, pouring into the spear in his hand, and instantly soared more than 3 times. With a clang, it was like a sword from the sky. The imperial spear's pressure was even more terrifying, and strands of mysterious and inexplicable order laws came out of it, interweaving and covering all directions. The tip of the spear was so sharp that it seemed to be able to penetrate the sun and the moon. The spear danced rapidly, turning into a sky full of spear shadows, covering all directions, surrounding the black clay pot, densely like rain, smashing wildly. In an instant, the sky collapsed, the earth cracked, and the void collapsed. However, there was still not even a ripple, and the black clay pot still stayed steadily in the air. This scene made countless people lose their courage. That is the Emperor's weapon. The treasure of Xiwei Fairy Palace. It is also the Emperor's weapon forged by Xiwei's ancestor with his life's efforts. Once it explodes, even the Quasi-Emperor has to avoid its edge. But now, there is not even a ripple? This is too outrageous. How can we fight like this? The disciples of Xiwei Fairy Palace fell into despair.